Hey there, this is Perch, and I want to talk about piracy. And this is one of those topics that, for a long time, I always thought was really cut and dry, and I still do think it is pretty cut and dry. But whenever the topic comes up in Facebook groups or social media, it always generates to me a surprising amount of people, weighing both sides. So, from my standpoint, I think piracy is theft. Fundamentally, it is stealing. It's stealing from creators. It's stealing from publishers, and it's theft. You can dress it up any way you want. You can make some justifications for how there's positive benefits to that. We'll get into it, but at the end of the day, it is theft. And I think if you're trying to come up with reasons why it's okay. You just need to be self-aware enough to know you are justifying theft. That is what you're doing. You're creating a justification for it. If companies wanted to put something out for free, they would do that. There are publishers, there are creators. I think Rags put the title out for free online, where you could view it on the web. Lots of people do that. That is their choice. When they do that, then yeah, getting it for free is getting it how the creator, the publisher, the people involved intended it, and that's obviously not theft. That is what is intended. But but all that aside, there's still a lot of people who want to justify theft, and here I want to say, everybody lives their life. They do what they do. You try and make good decisions in life, but nobody, absolutely nobody, is clean in this driven snow who's always done absolutely the most ethical, perfect things. Everyone has made mistakes or done things that they're not proud of, or maybe they know are wrong or didn't realize it was wrong, and years later they realized it was wrong. Whatever. I think that I'm not sitting here trying to preach at anybody or point a finger at you saying you bad for stealing. It is what it is. You have to make your own choices in life. You have to live with your own decisions, and that's ultimately up to you. So this isn't me lecturing you about you being wrong. I want to take that piece out of it. I want to talk about just piracy as a topic for comics. So there's been a couple myths around piracy, and the biggest one kind of formulated around music, and that was, if it wasn't for piracy of music, music as an industry wouldn't have transformed, and ultimately piracy was beneficial to sales because the music industry was going through a change. The traditional methods were not working, and people weren't adapting fast enough, and piracy helped push the industry to be something different that was naturally going to happen. It just accelerated a little bit and to its benefit. And that's there's a strong argument to be made there. It's still theft. The fact that it had a good outcome, or maybe a positive outcome, is a different matter. But music did experience. It is true that music as an industry was shifting, in the old model of brick and mortar stores selling CDs, and the way that creators and producers were basically getting a small handful of songs that were going to be marketed and pushed via the radio and the charts, and then kind of filled up the album to just have the album filled up, and then sell this whole package at an artificially high price point. That wasn't sustainable, and the digital transformation around what ultimately came out of iTunes and other music services was helpful. Piracy caused a lot of pain in music, not just of rich, fancy executives. The funny thing is when you pirate and you use the argument, well, some of these rich guys are just too rich anyway; they're not even going to feel it. Well, you're half right. They don't feel it. They continue to be rich, but that somebody feels it, and that somebody is typically the lower level, minimum wage workers, the people who are it's the people who are putting the CDs in the boxes, or the graphic designer who's working on the cover for freelance rates. Those are the people who get squeezed, and they absolutely get squeezed. And so, when you do this, and you're like, I'm taking it to the man, not really. The man has got his private jet and his luxury mansion and his yacht, and it's like, oh man, you mean my profits went from 500 million down to 450 million? Oh man, I'm not gonna I guess I'm not going to throw that fifth party in Bali this year. That's how you're hurting them. And I don't have, I do believe in the free market. I believe that people, if they can earn that money, then good on them. They're able to do it. Same time, I don't have sympathy for people who made millions or billions of dollars off of an industry, and the industry changes, and then they have to adjust their lifestyle. I don't have sympathy because the adjustment to their lifestyle is like, I can afford 20 cars this year, not 21. Whatever. I'm not hand waving it, but yeah. But like I said, the music industry, it was beneficial. It did create a new business, a new industry. It created new billionaires, many of them Apple people, and it did transform things. So in that regard, you can say that piracy led to a positive change, even if piracy, the act, was theft. And movies has been slightly different. There has been some benefit to movies. Movies also needed to go through the same digital transformation. But it hasn't been, piracy has had more of a negative impact there. Now, for streaming services and kind of a la carte, all you can eat services like Netflix and HBO and companies like that, there have been articles, and I think even HBO has admitted that the piracy had an unexpected positive benefit for them in terms of it helped with the marketing of their content. It helped them get more visibility, which actually did lead for sales. And that makes sense. That's why, if you want to relate it back to comics, if it's an indie group or an indie comic and they're struggling to get noticed in previews or at the store or wherever, then there is definitely an argument that piracy can give them the kind of marketing and visibility in the marketplace that they aren't getting from the traditional, you know, methods that are available to comics. And we'll get more to that because I think there's a big clue there of how the industry can move forward in that statement. But movies, there's been more pain in movies, and there's been, definitely you can talk to filmmakers on the lower end, independent filmmakers, or even some of the imprint studios within a studio, and those have largely died or gotten the axe or struggled because piracy has taken away that margin that was keeping them alive. Again, big budget films. If you're Disney and you're pumping out Disney films or Pixar films, you're obviously really rabid against piracy. But piracy as a concept is not going to impact you like it impacts a tiny little studio that needs that revenue. But for the people who are doing the pirating, it's all a wash. It's all the same. They're getting, you're getting giant. You put it this way: you don't have pirates who are the ethical pirate who's going, I'm only going to steal from the billion-dollar labels and film companies, and I'm going to actually put my money into the independent. I mean, if that's you, then way to go, Robin Hood. You're taking from the rich and giving to the poor. What do true champion? But I mean, the part of piracy that people just need to be honest about is, there's this argument with comics of, well, I'll pirate it for a while, to get to know it, and then because I like it, I'll go back and I'll buy all those issues. And I can count on one hand, without using any thumbs or fingers, the amount of time somebody has come in going, "Hey, I've been pirating this run, and I really like it. So can you help me find the back issues? Let me find it." And you can say, well, of course, nobody's going to come into a store and just admit to piracy. They'll be worried about a punch in the mouth. But it just this isn't happening. I mean, when you sell comics and you have your store, you kind of get a sense of the titles coming in, coming out, and the back issues coming in, coming out, and there's just this isn't happening. Is it possible that somebody is pirating a bunch of comics and then they are going into the bookstore and they're buying graphic novels and they're doing that? Yeah, sure, it's possible. I mean, I'm sure some people definitely do that. They want the physical copy, but the impact is still felt on the creator side. It is you're not bringing in nearly as much as is going out the door with piracy. And so to do that, we can look at something called an attach rate. An attach rate is to say, roughly, there's no true scientific meaning or method to really analyze this, but it's to say of all the content that's out there and the seeders that are getting this content versus the monthly sales. And that's a very inaccurate number because some people seed um, in incomplete runs, or they'll grab a whole run of comics, but really only get a few. I mean, it's not like I said, it's not a scientific number. But one thing that you see is with music, there became this metric that seeders to purchases were around 20%. So if you had 100 people pirating a given track, you'd have 20% of those who, you'd be able to find revenue for 20% of those numbers. So 20% of those people were actually buying, or somebody was buying, to kind of account for the numbers. And that's why I say this is very fuzzy math, because it's not an exact science, but it gives you a rough sense of, with music, there was a conversion, or at least there was still a healthy industry that would come out. With movies, it dropped slightly, but there's a lot of analysis around movies that the whole distribution of how movies get digitally to home and how it happens, and the accessibility of getting movies are much larger as a file format, and you have to have a device that can, for a long time understand the codecs and all the rest. So I believe movies was somewhere in the 12 to 15% range, and maybe even a little lower. And I think it's a couple years too early to really see where movies are going to net out, because there still are, whereas the idea of going into a store and buying a CD in a plastic case and taking it home is, a rare purchase now. And you've seen it just shrink to almost nothing in big block stores. Movies still has a business, and it's clinging on. It's clearly going away. It's going the way of digital, but for whatever reason, there's still a little bit more life there. So we're in transition. With comics, however, you see that number dip down to about 2 to 4%. And that's a much more scary number, because that is an unsustainable number. That's not enough profit coming in to actually support these titles. And really quickly, if you're sitting here listening, you're like, yeah, but what about? There's a lot of what abouts in this scenario. There's a lot of other factors. There is the content itself inside the comic. There is the fact that you don't have the quantity of really AAA great talent on some of these books. It's not knocking them. We're in a transition period itself, where a lot of the real mega artists and mega creators have either retired or doing part time or covers and not doing much else. And you haven't had that next crop of artists and creators step up in a big way, or at least get that kind of prominence as an Art Adams or a John Byrne, or any number of kind of the legendary creators we had over the last 30 years. And they will come. Those names will appear, and they'll kind of become standouts and kind of legends in their own right. But we're not there yet, so that's a factor. And the other undeniable factor is price. So it's a little bit what you saw with music when a CD is sold in a store in a little plastic case for $15, and you've got 2, maybe 3 tracks on there that people really paid attention to, and then you've got 8 tracks in there that are filler, clearly just filling out the rest of the album. $15 was a sickening price point to pay for basically 2-3 songs that the studio and the label is going to get behind. And so the price point was off base, and that's a big reason why piracy kind of kicked into gear, where you could just get a track and not pay nothing. And that's also one reason why, when the model came out, that you could just buy kind of track by track on an iTunes or a service like that it was so popular that it did take hold, and people did say, yeah, I'm willing to spend the money to buy this song and this song and this song. I'm willing to spend a reasonable rate. I'm willing to spend more per track than I would if I bought the whole album. I mean, if the track's going to cost $2, and an album was, $10, $12, $15, and you've got, a dozen tracks, and you're clearly paying more per track than if you were buying just the whole album. But when much of that album is filler, then you feel more confident and more happy with where your money's going. So comics has a similar problem. When comics have kind of hiked up to $3.99, $4.99, you've got the occasional issue there for 10.99, or it's just, or an event comes out and it's like 5.99 and it's a comic, and it's that price point is too high, and that drives people to piracy. It absolutely does. And even if piracy is theft, which it is, it's still, it's you are. I mean, you're almost forcing the issue. There's not an argument to be made to say, hey, look, you should, even if the creative teams aren't what they are, even if you're not totally happy with this comic, or even if you've never seen it before and you're taking a shot on a new book, at $5 a pop, that's pricing much of the market out. And this is a topic that I've had this conversation with creators, and it's always a really, like, you see the anger and the angst working over their face, as the conversation's being had, because it's an ugly one. But the creators worked so hard. This creative team really tried to bring you a good book, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not. There's definitely, you can tell some creative teams are really invested and some are not, and whether content of the book is to your liking is a kind of a different matter. But I feel for creators that work really hard for their book and really put themselves out to it, and then you slap a $4.99 price tag on it and you throw it out into the market, and it's like, yeah, it's not gonna. That's not going to sell a lot of copies. It's just too expensive. It's too expensive for somebody to take a chance on, and it's too expensive to sustain with 20 other books. The market that can afford that is shrinking, and so the reality is, legal or not legal, and it is not legal. Piracy is going to happen in that environment. I'm being pragmatic here. It's just a fact of life. And the best option you can get to is like, hey, maybe your book is so awesome, even though it's overpriced, that somebody will pirate it, fall in love with it, and go into the store. But that's really low odds that that's going to happen. Incredibly low odds. The quality of that book has to be so high, like just so ridiculously high, that not only are you willing to spend the $5, you're also willing to, you know, go to the store, look it up. It's probably fallen off the new week's release, so maybe you're paying even more because the store has shuffled that into a back issue. Maybe it's not available anymore. And just to go through all those steps, it's it's against human nature. It's not what people will do. They're not going to go seek out these titles. So piracy is scary. It's very scary for comic shop owners. It should be scary for publishers, and it should be a wake up call of saying, how are we going to address this? And if there's one lesson to be learned from the music industry or the music movie industry, you cannot address it by just screaming into the wind, pirates are bad. You have to come with a solution, and the solution is going to have to be uh, a lower price point, or it's going to have to be a better, kind of try before you buy model. I'm very skeptical that if suddenly, magically, out of nowhere, every single comic legend of the past suddenly showed back up, ready to work for current page rates, and were able to put out a monthly book, and they were put on titles. I'm skeptical that suddenly all the readers would go, okay, I'm totally cool now paying $4.99. Even even with legendary creators on the books, that price point is just too much for somebody to buy a lot of books. So we have to find some other models, and that doesn't necessarily mean lower prices. We need to do a whole show on that, because there's a huge side effect if you do lower prices that would be negative. So you can't just overnight lower prices, or you're gonna put everybody out of business. But there needs to be some other answers. Is it preview copies? Is it creating a version of the comic that is on a lower quality paper that could be sold at a lower price point? Uh, is it doing more things with digital for less money? I mean, that's some way this issue has to be tackled, but it can't be fixed by just saying, "Hey, pirates bad, you bad," because people are well tuned to ignore that. And it's also not going to be addressed by perpetuating the myth that no, pirating is completely fine. It will lead to sales. I'm doing a good thing for the industry. You're not. You're doing a good thing for yourself. You're reading comics. I'm glad your heart's still in comics, that you're seeing this stuff. That's nice. But, again, let's have no illusions about what's actually going on. So anyway, that's my bit on piracy. It's a really, really hard problem, and it's one of those that there are lessons to be learned from other industries that went through it. It's not apples to apples. It's not going to be exactly the same. There are going to have to be some real solutions, and those solutions have to be taken by the big boys. At the end of the day, DC, Marvel, Diamond, they've got to lead the way. You use the Spider-Man quote: "With great power comes great responsibility." Guess what, big publishers? You've got great power. You have the responsibility to help navigate us out of this problem, or you're going to watch your industry go up in smoke. And the reality is, there will always be a Spider-Man. There will always be a Batman. There will always be a Superman. These are giant licensed properties that will keep going. But it is going to become impossible to attract top-tier talent creators to work on books if there's not money in it. And your audience is going to be the same kind of audience that flocks to Barbie or GI Joe. Well, that's a bad example because there is a comic, but it's going to be the kind of audience that kind of knows a property from toys on a shelf. It's not going to be a audience that has the kind of embrace to these characters, these stories, and this vision, which built billion-dollar empires that people are enjoying. So there has to be change. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. I'm very grateful for all the subscribers. It's really amazing that all these people are here. Thank you very much. If you want to be notified, hit the notification button. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Tell me why piracy is okay. I'd love to hear your reasoning, or if you even better, if you have an idea of how we can get through this, love to hear that too. So thank you very much, and have a great day.